So breaking news just now, Tulsi Gabbard apparently has just qualified for the 4th debate in October. So this is great news. I'm glad she's going to be on the debate stage. You guys already know how I feel about this. Tulsi Gabbard is making foreign policy and our regime change wars a topic of discussion in this primary. So to have her on the debate stage where she can make that case to millions of people. And it's not just her anti-interventionism that is important about her campaign. She's also in support of many, many progressive policy priorities, whether it's radical action on climate change. She introduced the OFF Act a long time ago. Reforming our election system. Tulsi Gabbard says I believe she says she supports ranked choice voting. And she's also introduced the legislation that would mandate all districts in the United States either use paper ballot or some version of paper record backup to verify every vote in this country is accounted for and not tampered with. Medicare for all, workers' rights. You're going to go down the list. Tulsi Gabbard's there on all these progressive policy priorities. So to have her on that stage with Bernie Sanders making that case for a left-wing agenda is going to be great. So I am definitely looking forward to this next debate coming up. I believe it's October 15th. I'll be doing a separate video about that, and I'll post that some other time. I want to say one last thing about this, about Tulsi Gabbard making the debate stage. Liz, look out. That's all I'm going to say. I'll talk about that and my other thoughts on the debate in another segment. But right now, I want to talk about a very serious topic, and it's Tulsi Gabbard's position on what's happening in Kashmir right now. So just a quick summary of what's happened in the last few weeks. I'm not going to go into the beginning of this whole conflict between India and Pakistan, because honestly, that's not even relevant to the discussion about what's happening right now. What's happening right now is Kashmir is basically a territory in between India and Pakistan, and it doesn't belong technically to either one of the countries, but it's basically split in half, and there's a Kashmir on the Pakistani side, and there's a Kashmir within the borders of India. Now, Kashmir is a Muslim majority territory, and there's been a lot of bad blood between the Indian government, who have always been Hindi or Hindus. I don't know how to pronounce it, whatever. And because of that, to keep the peace, India granted Kashmir autonomy. So it's basically an autonomous state within India. They govern themselves. They have their own local government and political leaders. Technically, they're within the borders of India, but India doesn't actually govern the day-to-day operations in Kashmir. And that was a matter of Indian law. Well, one day, a couple weeks ago, the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, revoked the autonomy, the special status that Kashmir had, and he started an authoritarian crackdown. He cut off all communications. He cut off the internet access to the telephones and cell phone towers, blocked off the area, the roads, so it's hard to get in and out of there. You have to go through military checkpoints. Like I said earlier, they have thousands of Indian troops in Kashmir right now, basically declaring martial law. The Indian government is imposing all kinds of special new rules that the Kashmiris have to follow. I think there's a rule that says no more than like 3 or 4 people can meet in a specific area. So there's limits to the amount of people who can gather. So they can't even protest. But more than that, they can't even get together and figure out what's going on, because like I said, there's no cell phone communications. They cut off the internet access, so they can't even, much less talk to the outside world and explain to the outside world what's going on. They can't even communicate amongst the people in Kashmir about what's happening. And of course, they've been mass arrests, political arrests. All of the political leaders in Kashmir are either under arrest and in custody, or they're on house arrest. So understand something. This is a textbook authoritarian crackdown. The people in Kashmir can't contact the outside world to let them know what's going on. And the political leaders in Kashmir can't even get together and come up with a solution or even figure out what's going on, because they're all in jail or under house arrest. So there's literally no way any of them in Kashmir could come up with a solution to this problem. They have to pass notes, I guess, from house to house to even just communicate a message. So this is bad. I don't care how much you like Modi. I don't care how much you dislike Pakistan or how much you dislike the Muslims in Kashmir. There are only two reasons I could see for taking these extraordinary measures in Kashmir or anywhere else, really. The first is you want to militarily occupy this territory. You want to impose lawless, authoritarian, undemocratic rule over this religious minority, restrict their movement, and basically have them live like second-class citizens in a police state. Or you actually want to round them all up and do a genocide, kill all of them, or at the very least, run them out of the territory so you can steal their land. That's the only explanation for taking these extraordinary measures in Kashmir. So, knowing what I know, knowing what I just explained to you, Tulsi Gabbard is asked about Kashmir, and instead of rebuking Modi and the BJP party and the far-right extremists in the Indian government who are obviously doing a lawless, brutal, authoritarian crackdown, literally disappearing people, murdering people, torturing people, locking up political dissidents, knowing all of that, instead of condemning them, this is how Tulsi Gabbard answered, and it's honestly a cringeworthy answer.
With so many people taking a strong stance on the issue in Kashmir, what is your personal idea as to how we deal with such a complex situation instead of painting it as a black and white issue?
Yeah, well, first of all, recognizing that it is complex. It is not as clear cut as this one side versus this one side. And I think it's important as outsiders looking in to understand the complex history of Kashmir and what has happened to people there in the past, and how many families were driven from their homes there and fled and have not been able to return home. How the previous government had policies in place that made homosexuality illegal, that suppressed the voices of women, that made it, so I met a woman a couple of days ago who said that she as a Kashmiri woman had no rights to own property there in her homeland. So these changes are things that are happening in a sovereign country. They're very difficult. There are concerns that should be addressed about human rights violations and civil rights violations. But overall, I think this is a situation, again, in a sovereign country that must be worked out by all sides who have a stake in their own future there.
Okay, so she starts with this both sides bullshit, and you have to know the history of it. Look, there's no both sides to this. Again, I'm not talking about history of this conflict, how it began, who's more at fault, how we got to the point where this is disputed territory. I'm not interested in any of that for the sake of this discussion because it's entirely relevant. Now, I'm not saying that information. Now, that information is relevant if we're talking about, in general, how do we settle this disputed territory situation once and for all, and the future of who should govern Kashmir. I don't know the whole story. I'm not pretending like I know the whole story. And yes, it will be relevant to know that information when determining a ultimate solution to the Kashmir situation. Right now, the conversation at hand is Narendra Modi is clearly doing, at best case scenario, a lawless authoritarian crackdown, locking up political dissidents, torturing people, disappearing, possibly murdering innocent civilians without due process, doing all of that, cutting off all communications to Kashmir, blocking off entry to Kashmir. There's no other way to interpret that other than him doing an authoritarian crackdown or starting a genocide. And then she kind of goes into this long side rant about all the bad shit that the Kashmiri government or the Muslims in Kashmir have done. They're bad on women's rights. They're bad on LGBT rights. They're bad. They've been kicking people out of their homes and stealing people's land. She just goes down this list of the bad things that the government, the Muslim government of Kashmir has done. But again, that's entirely irrelevant to the conversation. We're talking about the war crimes and human rights violations of Narendra Modi right now. That's the topic when we're talking about Kashmir. That sounds like some weird victim blaming to me. Like, oh, maybe you guys had it coming because you had your government was shitty on women's rights and they were shitty on gay rights. So if Narendra Modi comes in and drops the fucking hammer, maybe you guys had it coming and you shouldn't have been so. Maybe you should have governed your territory better. Like, that's how it came off to me, and that's very cringy. That's cringeworthy. And then she kind of ends it with, well, this is happening in a sovereign country, and I don't think the U.S. should be involved, and we have to let them handle it or whatever, yada, yada. Okay, I'm with you on, I don't think there should be unilateral U.S. military intervention into India and Kashmir over the situation. I'm not saying that. But does that mean that U.S. politicians aren't allowed to criticize Narendra Modi doing a authoritarian crackdown, possibly a genocide? Is that what it means? Because it's happening in their country, we're not allowed to say anything about it? And furthermore, they're doing this with weapons that they bought from the U.S. government. They've bought billions of dollars worth of weapons from the United States, and I'm pretty sure Congress has to approve those weapon sales. So if the U.S. government is allowing weapons to be sold to the Indian government, who is doing a genocide with those weapons, yeah, I think someone who's running for president, or just even someone who's a member of Congress, has a responsibility to say something about that, has a responsibility to lay down the line like you usually do when it's anyone else, lay down the law and be like, hey man, look, cut this shit out. We're stopping arms sales to India. No more weapons. We're going to put diplomatic pressure on them to stop this genocide because it's wrong and it's immoral. And I can't believe they did that with weapons that they bought from the United States. That's the answer you should be giving, instead of, oh man, the Kashmiri government has done some fucked up shit in the past. They were bad to women and all of that. Also, it's happening in India's country, in India's borders. They're a sovereign country, and I think we should stay out of it. Next question. Like, no, that's such a lackluster and weak answer from Tulsi Gabbard. And if you think that's just, okay, that was a bad answer, maybe she didn't fully articulate her position on the Kashmir situation and it was just a bad day. No, she's been tiptoeing around this issue since it started. And more than that, she put out a video basically praising and welcoming Modi to the United States the other day. So let me show you that video and I'll come back.
Aloha and namaste. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to Prime Minister Modi on his latest visit to the United States. And I'm sorry that I'm not able to join all of you there in person due to previously scheduled presidential campaign events in Iowa. But I'm really glad to see so many Indian Americans from all across the country, as well as many of my colleagues in Congress coming together there. Now, India is the world's largest democracy and one of the United States' most important partners in the Asia-Pacific region. Our two nations must continue to work closely together if we are to address the pressing issues that impact us and the world. Issues like combating climate.
Now, just for a second, I want you to imagine Tulsi Gabbard made that video, but to Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, when he comes to the United States. Can you imagine Tulsi Gabbard making that video? Completely ignoring the human rights violations, completely ignoring the genocide and the war crimes being committed with U.S. weapons, completely ignoring all of that, and giving him a warm, welcoming video saying, man, I would love to be there with you in person. What? But again, she seems much more forgiving and cordial and understanding when it's Modi, and I'll explain why I think that is a little bit later on. But let me just talk about this video real quick. That video was entirely unnecessary. Unnecessary. Why do you have to do a video welcoming him to the United States? There's already been, the mainstream media is going to suck him off. Donald Trump is going to suck him off. So why do you feel the need to pile on just to make Modi feel an extra special welcome to the United States? Like, why? I just told you all, I just laid out all the horrific, terrible shit he's doing in Kashmir. And that's just Kashmir. Modi has a long record. But I just laid out the shit that he's doing in Kashmir. Why the fuck you need to roll out a warm welcome to him? I don't get it. And this isn't me saying Tulsi Gabbard and every other politician in the United States needs to condemn Modi and say no more discussions with U.S. politicians unless you end what's happening in Kashmir. Unless you follow our conditions, there will be no discussions with the Indian Prime Minister. I'm not saying that. I don't agree with that. Even if I did hold that position, it's not realistic and it's not like that's going to happen. India is one of our largest trading partners. There's billions of dollars going back and forth in our economies. There's no way that every single politician in the United States is just going to cut off communications with them because of what's happening in Kashmir. That's just not going to happen. What I am saying, though, is stop with the red carpet. Stop with the praise. Stop acting like he's your best friend. Stop acting like he's a great ally to the United States. Stop acting like he's this warm, lovable business partner who only has the best intentions for his country and his people. Stop acting like that. If you want to talk to Modi, talk to Modi. Have actual, real diplomatic negotiations and discussions. You don't need to be going to throwing huge fucking events at stadiums. You don't need to be having any fancy galas and dinners or anything like that. You don't need to be singing his praises or anything like that. You want to have talks, walk into a room and talk. That's it. The US and India has trillions of dollars of economic business to discuss. Talk business. You have serious concerns about what's happening in Kashmir and you want that to end. Talk business, negotiate, threaten to cut off any US aid to India, cut off arms sales to India. Do whatever you have to incentivize Modi to end what's happening in Kashmir. And then that's the end of the discussion. You don't have to do all of this grandiose state visit bullshit. No, he's not someone who should be welcome to the United States. That isn't something that we should be co-signing and endorsing and saying, hey, everybody, look how we welcome brutal authoritarian dictators who conduct genocides. We'll welcome you to the United States and we'll pack fucking stadiums, give you endless fawning media coverage. All of our politicians will line up to kiss your fucking feet and we'll say nothing but good things about you. We don't need to do all of that. You want to have talks? I'm with talks. I'm all for negotiations, especially to end what's happening in Kashmir. Then talk. You don't need to be putting out these goofy ass campaign videos praising Modi, especially when people are criticizing you for being too friendly to Modi. The most logical explanation as to why Tulsi Gabbard is acting this way when it comes to Kashmir and Narendra Modi is her religion. Simple as that. That's the most logical explanation I can think of. And I'm not saying that she's a Hindu, so she's wants to kill all Muslims. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying she is biased because of her religion. And that's true with anyone who is religious or subscribes to a religion. You're going to be biased towards your religion. Don't tell me that Tulsi Gabbard shut off her brain completely and stop questioning when it comes to the Hindu religion, which is what she does. She's clearly not being critical of the religion at all if she thinks that depending on whether you're a good person or a bad person, when you die, either you're going to be reborn as a fruit fly or you're going to be reborn as a king. Like, there's no critical thought going there. There's no, wait, has anybody even proven this before? How does anybody know this is true? There's no critical thought there. She just heard it. It's her religion and she believes it. The same with karma. She believes that there's this magical entity in the universe watching every single thing that every single person does on this planet. And if they do a good thing, then that magical entity rewards them and does a good thing back to them. And if they do a bad thing, that magical entity knows it and they do a bad thing back to them. And that's how the universe stays balanced. She believes that. She's not being critical about it at all. She's not saying, hey, that sounds kind of silly. She's not saying that kind of relies on there having to be some sort of magic and nobody has ever proven that ever. There's no, is there any scientific proof? There's no critical thought to it at all. It's her religion. She was told it and she grew up believing it and she thinks it's true. She doesn't think critically of it. That's how everybody is with their religion. So when you have Narendra Modi, who is honestly the most powerful Hindu leader in the world, most powerful Hindu figure in the world, he's seen by people in the Hindu religion as the person who is doing the most to advance their religion and their priorities on the planet. So what Narendra Modi says has a lot of sway in the Hindu community. So when Narendra Modi is doing an authoritarian crackdown in Kashmir and arguably a genocide, and you're someone who's part of the Hindu religion and you've already shut your brain off and not thought about the religion critically at all, clearly, or else you wouldn't be in the religion, then is it such a leap in logic to think, when the most powerful leader of that religion does something, you're not going to criticize it? That's true, again, for every religion and any religious person, or most religious people, I should say. And more than just the I would say difference that Hindus pay to Modi, is it possible that Tulsi Gabbard, through her lifetime, we already know that her father was some sort of extremist. Is it possible that at the same time when she was being indoctrinated with the anti-LGBT propaganda, is it possible that she was also indoctrinated with some anti-Kashmiri propaganda? Yeah, that's very possible too. It could be possible that someone who is part of the Hindu religion gets taught about the history of the religion and the bad blood between the Muslims and the Pakistanis and what's happening in Kashmir, and they have their own biased interpretation of whose fault it is and who's at fault and who's responsible for the situation. Yes, it is very possible that's what's biasing Tulsi Gabbard too. Because other than that, I don't see how this makes sense. Tulsi Gabbard has made ending U.S. regime change wars and ending all these illegal wars that we're doing overseas that are killing scores of civilians, and we're doing human rights violations and war crimes and torture and all of that stuff, propping up authoritarian dictators. She has made railing against those things the centerpiece of her campaign. So why is it, and more than that, she has railed against our other allies who are also committing war crimes and human rights violations and doing torture and all these other human rights abuses? She's also called them out. So why is it now when it's Narendra Modi, she's taking the stance, oh man, it's happening in sovereign borders. It's in sovereign borders, and I can't really say anything. That's their own government and we're our own government, and we govern our country and they govern their country. So we can't really get in the middle of that now, can we? She doesn't say the same thing when it's Saudi Arabia. When it's Saudi Arabia, she'll rail against them and she'll say, hey, you know what? We're giving them weapons, so you're goddamn right. I have, as a U.S. congressperson, I have the right to criticize Saudi policy, especially when they're using our weapons to conduct a genocide and do human rights violations. She's right when she says that. So why doesn't she say that when it's Narendra Modi, when he's using our weapons to conduct human rights violations in Kashmir? Instead, when it's that, it's the both sides, and you have to know the history of Kashmir and all this other bullshit. So there is a bias there. There's definitely a bias. I feel like my explanation is the most logical. If you have another explanation as to why she's acting this way, I'd love to hear it. But don't tell me that this is normal and it's just fine and everyone's reading into it and Tulsi Gabbard's position on Kashmir is 100% correct. Don't tell me that, because I'm not believing that. And I would love to hear if anybody disagrees with me, if they can make a cogent, coherent argument as to why Tulsi Gabbard is right on Kashmir. I'd love to hear it, because Bernie Sanders has came out and he set the record straight on this, and he's been unequivocal. He's been dogged on this. He's condemned Modi. He says this is a brutal authoritarian crackdown and this is possibly the beginning of a genocide, and it needs to end now. Bernie Sanders didn't tiptoe. He didn't hedge. None of that bullshit. So I would love to hear if anybody believes that Tulsi Gabbard is right on this, how you think Tulsi Gabbard is right on this.